Very passionate about this topic, and I constantly speak about the fact that I felt safer in Egypt than I do in Australia. My personal experience of living there made me feel so much more at peace than being here.
Even the idea of taking taboo talk there is a big risk, or thinking beforehand taking it there might be a big risk.
That's that was different.
Let's do that in the second half. I'm gonna play.
Let's come back to that one.
Yeah, I'm gonna. So the one thing that you said before we went to the break was that you felt much more safer in Egypt than you do in Sydney.
Yeah.
How so? And please elaborate.
Look, for me, as a Muslim woman, and previous to last year as a scarfed Muslim woman, it's been a while since I felt safe in Australia. I would say pretty much since around the time of the Link Cafe siege. There was a big backlash on the Muslim community, and Islamophobia just went through the roof. So much so that someone had to create an Islamophobia registry to register the amount of Islamophobic experiences, especially Muslim women were having their headscarves pulled off, being spat at, being called so these are the kind of things that were happening around that time that on a global scale maybe people were not aware of, but these were the lived experiences of, I never thankfully had an experience to that degree, but there was just a sentiment, and I would say to some degree still is a sentiment in the air that we're not really welcome here. So being on public transport, being in public spaces, if it was clear that I was Muslim in Australia, I always felt on edge. I always chose my seat on a train or a bus or in a room strategically so that no one could come behind me and harm me. And I constantly had that thought in the back of my mind, and it just felt so unsettling. I never felt like I was just free. And then going to Egypt, to a Muslim country, and I mean, it has its own, don't get me wrong,
challenges,
it has its own challenges and has its own issues. I didn't have to worry about that. I never had to, if anything, there's a community and a cultural sense of looking out for people that I found there a lot more. If someone needs help in the middle of the street, people actually go over and they check in. It's not, they don't have a culture of, every man for themselves. It's very much community
family
driven.
orientated.
And it's family orientated. And even if you don't know each other, even if you're complete strangers, people want to connect and help one another.
Yeah, that's right.
And I don't want to paint a picture of Egypt as a perfect place, but I would say one of the biggest positive feelings I had of being there was that I always felt like someone had my back, even if it was an Uber driver or a store person. People were always aware of who's around and
courteous and stuff like that.
And people go out of their way to help someone else. And I've had a lot of other people speak about the Middle East in general in that way. So I definitely felt safer there. I was not alert at all times. People might think about Egypt, it's obviously not in a very stable political environment, but at the same time, on a level of everyday life,
it's
you're
normal,
just living your life.
Yeah. You talked about the Lent Siege Cafe and how it affected the Muslim community, but from my perspective, it affected them even if you look Middle Eastern too.
The Sikh community were targeted
exactly,
in a lot of attacks.
It's
anyone who looked different.
And even though man, I've had my neighbors, whatever, I've had the worst with that sort of stuff, and it doesn't bother me because when for me, my mum taught me, when you know who you are and you know your history, you know who, how can anyone laugh at you? You're standing on foundations of
But doesn't it get tiring?
No, not really. I live in a predominantly white and Asian area, so they see my parents there and they're like, what the hell are you doing here? You're not supposed to have a house in this area, you know what I mean? But the thing is, they don't know the history. If they knew the history, if they know who people are, if people ask questions to each other, I think they'll start to melt down their biases and stuff like that.
For sure.
And living the life instead of complaining about if I was as young and complaining about this guy's picking on me, but then I realized they weak and they trying to feel strong by putting you down, you know what I mean? And for me, I just having brothers, standing up for myself you were doing when you were young, voicing who I am and not caring what they think is just it's given me a foundation where people give you a sort of respect, sort of thing.
So do you think that came from your upbringing?
100%. Because my parents had to fight in their position where they are today. They had to fight literally the council and get what they needed to do to give us a living and give us food on the table and stuff like that. You know, my parents were young, 25 and 20 or 19, whatever, having kids, getting kicked out of the house from his, you know what I mean? It's like that fighting spirit didn't have to be said. It was more shown through like life. And I feel like if I'm taking your shots and still walking forward, those people are like, well, we can't get him. And they sort of lay off you sort of thing. And then they give you this sort of, say respect maybe, or they're just, they're not strong enough to go up against you or whatever it may be, but they just melts down their whole perception of what a Middle Eastern person is. I don't care if you're Muslim or Christian. What matters is, are you representing who you are, you know, fully and truly, not just trying to like fit a stereotype sort of thing, you know what I mean? But that's my rant for today.
I'm just nodding.
Exactly.
I'm nodding all along. I'm with you 100%.